Minecraft horror story, Hide and Fear. Steve pressed both hands over his mouth while something counted on the other side of the wall. The voice was soft, slow, and wrong. It said 1, then 2, then 4, then 4 again. Each number came from a different place in the room above him, first by the door, then near the furnace, then directly over his head. Steve was hidden in a storage hole beneath the floor of a small village house. A single layer of spruce planks separated him from the black feet moving across the room. He could see those feet through a thin gap between 2 blocks. They were too long for any normal mob. They stopped beside the crafting table, turned without making a step, and crossed toward the bed. Steve held still. His iron sword lay against his leg, but he knew it would not help. A line of pale words had appeared across his sight less than a minute earlier. Hiding. Find a dark place. Do not make a sound. The last word had been followed by a timer. It was now at 17 seconds. Above him, a torch broke. The item bounced once on the wooden floor. The creature stopped counting. Steve heard Rowan whisper from somewhere outside the house. "Steve?" The black feet vanished. For one short moment, the room was silent. Then Rowan screamed. 2 days earlier, there had been nothing frightening about the village. Steve, Rowan, and Mira had found it on the edge of a wide plains biome after a long trip north. It had 9 houses, 2 farms, an iron golem, and a stone church with a tower high enough to see the nearby spruce forest. A river curved around the eastern side, making the place easy to protect. To the west stood a ruined portal half buried in dirt. Steve had called it the best place they had found in weeks. They had been searching for a stronghold. Rowan carried the Eyes of Ender, Mira kept the maps, and Steve handled most of the building. Their plan was simple: repair the village, gather food, trade for better gear, and continue once they had enough supplies. They placed their beds in the largest house near the well. By sunset, Steve had fixed the roof. Rowan had blocked the open paths with fences. Mira had lit the farms and moved the villagers indoors. The first night passed without trouble. Zombies gathered beyond the fence, arrows struck the outer walls, and a spider climbed onto the roof, but the 3 friends stayed awake to finish their work. None of them used a bed. They had survived many nights without sleep before. Phantoms were annoying, but they were not a real danger to 3 players in iron armor. During the second day, Steve noticed a shape near the spruce trees. It was far beyond the river, standing between 2 trunks. At first he thought it was an Enderman. The body was tall and black, and its arms hung almost to its knees. But an Enderman had purple eyes and moved with quick, sharp jumps. This thing had a white face. Even from across the water, Steve could see it. "Mira," he said, "look at the forest." She turned from the farm. The shape was gone. Rowan laughed when Steve described it. "A skeleton in shadow," he said. "Or a sheep with half its body behind a tree." Sheep do not have shoulders that wide. Then it was a very strong sheep. Steve did not answer. He crossed the river before dark and searched the place where it had stood. There were no tracks, dropped items, or broken leaves. He found only one spruce sign fixed to the back of a tree. The sign looked new. 4 words had been written on it. "Do you like games?" Steve broke the sign and brought it back. Rowan stopped laughing after that. They agreed to sleep on the second night, but work kept getting in the way. A raid patrol appeared near sunset. Steve and Rowan chased it away before the captain could reach the village. While they fought, Mira found that 2 villagers had escaped through a gap in the fence. By the time everyone was safe, the moon was high and phantoms were circling above the roofs. Steve entered the house first. All 3 beds were gone. The room had not been damaged. The chests were still locked. Their food, tools, and emeralds had not been touched. Only the beds were missing. In the center of the floor stood the spruce sign Steve had broken by the river. Not yet. Mira checked every house. Rowan searched the fields and river. Steve climbed the church tower and looked across the dark land. He saw nothing except the phantoms. They spent the rest of the night inside the stone church, listening to wings strike the roof. On the 3rd day, fear began to change the way they worked. Every open door looked like a mistake. Every dark window seemed to hold a face. Steve made new beds and placed one in each of 3 different houses. Rowan built a bell alarm with redstone dust and tripwires around the fence. Mira traded for lanterns until the village was brighter than noon. They told themselves that whatever had taken the first beds would have nowhere left to hide. At midday, the iron golem walked to the western gate and stopped. It raised both arms as if ready to attack. Nothing stood on the other side. The golem remained there for nearly an hour, staring at empty grass. Then its head turned towards Steve. Behind the golem, far out on the plain, the black figure was waiting. This time, all 3 of them saw it. It stood almost 4 blocks tall. Its body was narrow at the waist and wide across the shoulders. Its arms were longer than Steve's whole body. A pointed black head rose above a smooth white mask. 2 dark holes marked the eyes. The mask tilted slightly, giving it the look of someone trying to understand them. The iron golem charged. The creature did not move until the golem was close enough to strike. Then the black body folded sideways in a way no Minecraft model should bend. The iron arms passed through empty air. The creature straightened behind the golem and touched its back with one long hand. The golem vanished. No death sound came. No iron dropped. One frame it was there, and the next there was only grass. Words appeared across Steve's sight. A new playmate has joined. The creature raised one hand and waved. Then every bell in the village rang at once. The sound did not stop for the rest of the day. Steve cut the bells down, but the ringing continued from the empty hooks. Rowan broke the redstone alarm. Mira covered her ears and shouted that they needed to leave. They packed only what they could carry: food, blocks, eyes of ender, weapons, and a boat for the river. Before they reached the eastern gate, the sun dropped below the horizon much faster than it should have. Day turned to night in less than 10 seconds. The village went black. All the lanterns went out together. The torches remained fixed to the walls, but their flames became tiny blue points that gave no light. The ringing bells stopped. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then a childlike voice spoke from everywhere. "Let us play." The words "hiding" and "find a good place to hide" filled the darkness. A number 60 appeared below them and began to fall. Rowan ran toward the church. Mira fled into the farm, where a trapdoor led to a water trench under the wheat. Steve chose the nearest house. He ripped up 2 floor planks, dropped into the storage hole, and placed the wood above him just as the count reached 51. That was how he came to be watching the black feet cross the floor. When Rowan whispered his name, the playmate left the house without opening the door. Rowan's scream began near the well and moved through the village at impossible speed. It passed the church, crossed the farms, reached the western wall, and then rose into the sky. Steve could not tell whether Rowan was being carried or whether the scream itself was moving without him. The timer showed 9. Something struck the outside wall. Oak planks cracked, glass shattered. A long black hand pushed through the block beside Steve's head. Its fingers opened and felt along the dirt. Steve leaned back until stone pressed into his spine. One finger passed less than an inch from his nose. The timer reached 3. The hand stopped. 2. The white mask lowered into the hole where the broken block had been. It had no mouth. Its dark eye holes faced Steve. 1. The mask began to change. A thin split opened below the eyes. The timer vanished. Light returned to the torches. The black hand pulled out of the wall, and the mask disappeared. A bright message crossed Steve's sight. Game over, you win. Soft laughter moved away across the roof. Steve remained under the floor for another full minute. When he finally climbed out, the village looked as if a storm had crossed it. Doors hung open. Windows were gone. The path around the well was torn apart. Yet the villagers were still inside their houses, standing in silence. None of them made their usual sounds. Every one of them faced the wall. Mira crawled out of the water trench. She was shaking and covered in mud, but alive. She had hidden beneath a lily pad at the dark end of the farm channel. Twice, she said, a long arm had moved through the water above her. It had tapped each dirt block as if checking for a hollow space. They found Rowan's shield beside the western gate. His armor, tools, and food were spread in a straight line leading beyond the wall. The line ended at the place where the iron golem had vanished. There was no body and no death message. On the grass stood another sign. Too loud. Mira wanted to run at once. Steve wanted to find Rowan. They argued until a strange sound came from the largest house. It was the dry crack of fire. The 3 new beds were stacked inside, though they had been placed in different buildings. All of them were burning. The fire spread to the walls before Steve could reach it. Water slowed the flames but did not put out the beds. They burned without breaking, filling the house with black smoke. Through the smoke, Steve saw the white mask at the upstairs window. When he rushed outside, the room was empty. Steve and Mira left before dawn. They followed the river in a boat because it was faster than crossing the forest. Steve kept Rowan's shield in the front of the boat. Neither of them spoke for the first 1,000 blocks. Behind them, smoke from the village rose in a thin black line. The sky slowly brightened, but the sun looked pale and weak. Mira opened the map and pointed north. The eye moved this way before, she said. If we find the stronghold, we can reach the end. Maybe it cannot follow us between dimensions. It took a golem without touching the drops, Steve said. Do you think a portal matters to it? I think staying matters less. They left the river at a birch forest and continued on foot. Steve threw an eye of ender. It rose, drifted north, and fell. They walked until noon, then threw another. The eye moved west. The stronghold was close. For a while, the normal rules of the world seemed to return. Cows moved through the trees. Bees circled flowers. A ruined portal stood on a low hill, and a chest beside it held gold boots, obsidian, and a fire charge. Steve almost relaxed. Then Mira pointed to the hill behind them. The playmate stood at the edge of the birch forest. In daylight, it looked even less natural. No detail marked its black body. Sunlight did not cast color across it. It was a hole shaped like a person. The white mask shone too brightly, clean and smooth against the trees. It did not attack. It only watched. Steve raised Rowan's shield. Where is he? The playmate tilted its mask. Where is Rowan? Steve shouted. The white mask slowly turned toward Mira. Then the creature pointed one long finger at the ground between them. A player name appeared over an empty patch of grass. Rowan. The name floated there for a second. The earth below it opened with the sound of a trap door. Steve and Mira stepped back. A one-block hole led straight down into darkness. From far below came Rowan's voice. Do not follow me. The hole closed. The playmate was gone. Steve dug at the spot until his stone shovel broke. There was no shaft below it, only solid dirt and stone. Mira pulled him away when night began to fall. They had no beds. They could not risk another game, and neither understood how soon it might begin again. They found a cave entrance near the hill and followed it down, hoping to reach the stronghold from below. Steve blocked the opening behind them. Mira placed torches at every turn. The cave became a narrow tunnel, then opened into an abandoned mineshaft. Oak supports crossed the ceiling. Cobwebs filled the side paths. Rails led into black tunnels that seemed older than the rest of the world. Near a broken minecart, Steve found a chest that had already been opened. It held rotten flesh, 2 rails, and a written book. The first page contained only a date, day 63. The pages after that were filled with short notes. Do not stay awake for 2 nights. If the 3rd night begins, you will get a roll. If you hide, darkness helps. Sound kills. If you seek, find the white face 3 times. It can burn the beds. It does not forget a player who wins. The final page had been torn, but part of one sentence remained. The game is not over when the message says, Mira read the line twice. Someone knew about it. Someone lost the book, Steve said. Or left it. They searched the mine shaft for more signs. At the end of a side tunnel, they found a small shelter built from wool. A redstone lamp hung inside, but no lever controlled it. 3 item frames were fixed to the wall. The first held a clock. The second held a white banner with 2 black dots. The third was empty. Below the frames stood 3 armor stands. 2 wore player heads Steve did not know. The last wore Rowan's iron helmet. Mira backed into the tunnel. That was not here before. Steve took the helmet. It was damaged but still warm. A sound came from inside it, quiet enough that he nearly missed it. Counting. He threw the helmet down. All the torches in the mine shaft broke at once. The darkness became complete. Steve heard Mira draw her bow. A line of red text appeared across his sight. Seeking. Find me 3 times. The timer began at 60. Steve's sight filled with black. It was not normal darkness. He could not see the glow of a torch in his hand or the items in his quick bar. Even Mira's name vanished. Somewhere ahead, the playmate laughed. Stay with me, Steve said. I am here. Mira's voice came from his left. Then the same voice answered from his right. I am here. Steve swung his sword toward the second voice. The blade struck a wooden support. Gravel fell in the distance. The black cover over his sight cleared when the timer reached 52. The mineshaft had changed. Every tunnel now ended in a wooden door. There had been no doors before. White masks were painted on the planks. We have to find it, Mira said. 3 times. They opened the nearest door. Behind it was a stone wall. The next led to a room full of cobwebs. A black shape stood in the far corner with its back turned. Steve ran forward and struck it. The shape collapsed into black smoke. One of 3 pale marks lit above the timer. 1? The playmate whispered beside his ear. Steve spun, but saw only Mira. At 40 seconds, they found the second shape hanging upside down among the cobwebs on the ceiling. Its arms were folded across its chest. Mira hit it with an arrow. Smoke filled the room, and the second mark lit. The timer began to move faster. 39 became 35. 35 became 29. They ran through door after door. Each opened to a piece of the village they had left behind. One room held the burning beds, another held the empty hook where the bell had hung, another contained the farm channel where Mira had hidden. Water dripped upward from the trench and vanished into the ceiling. At 14 seconds, they opened a door onto the village church. Rowan stood at the altar with his back to them. Steve, he said, it let me go. Mira lowered her bow. Steve did not move. Rowan wore no armor, but his skin looked normal. His name floated over his head. He turned slowly. Please, Rowan said, we have to leave. The timer showed 8. Steve looked at Rowan's shadow. It stretched toward the altar, though the only torch was behind it. At the top of the shadow was a long, pointed head. Steve threw Rowan's shield. The shield struck his friend in the chest. Rowan's body split open like a curtain. Behind it crouched the playmate, its white mask inches from the floor. Steve hit the mask with his sword. The third mark lit at 1 second. The false church vanished. Steve and Mira were back in the wool shelter. The redstone lamp glowed above them. A message filled the air. Game over, you win. The voice laughed longer this time. It sounded pleased. Then Rowan's helmet said, You found me. Mira brought her axe down on the helmet. The first hit bent the metal. The second split it. On the third, the helmet broke into an iron nugget and a strip of black cloth that should not have been there. The cloth moved like a small worm, curling toward the darkest corner of the shelter. Steve dropped a torch on it. The cloth burned with a white flame. From every tunnel around them came a deep breath, followed by a voice that no longer sounded playful. Cheetah. The wooden supports began to crack. Steve and Mira ran. Cave spiders poured from a broken spawner behind them, but the spiders were not chasing the 2 players. They climbed over Steve's boots and rushed toward the wool room. A black arm reached out of the doorway and swept them away. The mineshaft shook. Gravel and stone fell from the ceiling. Mira followed the compass while Steve placed blocks behind them. The needle had started pointing through the north wall as soon as the game ended. It did not point toward world spawn, it pointed toward the eyes of Ender in Steve's pack. The stronghold was close enough to pull at everything connected to it. They broke through a layer of stone and found mossy bricks. The stronghold corridor beyond was empty, silent, and dry. Iron doors stood open. The torches in the wall had burned out long ago. Steve blocked the hole from the mine shaft and listened as the collapse ended on the other side. No black hand came through. No white mask appeared. For the first time since the village, they had a place with one entrance. Mira sat against the wall. It called us cheaters. We followed its rule. You hit it while it wore Rowan. That was the game. Maybe only to us. Steve wanted to reject that thought, but the playmate had never promised fair rules. It had told them to hide, then broken the wall. It had told them to seek, then changed the rooms and copied their friend. Its cheerful messages meant nothing. Winning only made it more interested. They moved through the stronghold, marking each turn with cobblestone. A prison room held 2 zombies behind iron bars. A fountain room had no water, only a layer of black dust in the basin. The library was still whole. Shelves rose to the ceiling, and cobwebs hung between the lamps. Mira searched for books about portals, while Steve checked for hidden movement. On a reading table, they found a second journal. Unlike the notes in the mine shaft, this book told a full story. Its writer had lived in the same village years before. He had skipped sleep while building a road. On the 3rd night, the playmate appeared. He won a hiding game by sealing himself inside a wool room. The next night, it made him seek after that. It returned even when he slept. The writer had tried to fight it with diamond weapons. The blows passed through its body unless a game was active. He had tried lava, iron golems, snow traps, and a fall from a mountain. Nothing held it. Then he discovered one simple rule that worked for a few minutes. While the playmate was taking part in a game, it could be caught by things the world treated as seats. A minecart held it. A boat held it longer. The final pages described a plan to trap the playmate and send it through an end portal. The writer believed the void between worlds would cut the creature away from him. His last clear line read, "I have placed 12 eyes. Tonight I will be free." The next page was covered in black fingerprints. Below them, a different hand had written, "He was very good at hiding." Mira closed the book. So the portal room is here, and it already knows where. They found the room after midnight. Silverfish stirred inside the walls, and lava glowed beneath the portal frame. Every socket around the frame was empty. That made no sense. The journal said 12 eyes had been placed. Steve checked his pack. He and Rowan had gathered 11 eyes of Ender. 2 had broken during the search. 9 remained. The frame needed 12. 3 short, Mira said. "We have blaze powder." Steve counted their supplies. "We need Ender pearls." Underground? There were Endermen near the surface. Mira looked back at the dark doorway. "That means leaving." They did not have a better choice. They made a base in the portal room and closed the entrance with an iron door. Steve built 2 beds from wool found in the library. One went beside the wall. The other went on the far side of the lava, where no creature could stand near both. Mira tried the first bed. A message appeared. "You may not rest now. The bed is occupied." No one lay in it. Steve tried the other. He received the same message. The pillow on Mira's bed slowly pressed down, as if an unseen head had settled there. A long dent formed across the blanket. Then a white mask rose through the mattress. Steve pulled Mira away. The bed burst into flame. The second bed caught fire at the same moment. The playmate's mask sank back into the burning wool. Its laughter came from under the lava. They had now missed a third night of sleep. Mira stared at the flames. It wants another game. Steve opened the journal to the page about the boat. Then we choose where it plays. They spent the rest of the night changing the portal room. Steve placed wool across the floor to soften every step. Mira ran redstone from a laver to 3 dispensers. The first held water, the second held a boat, and the third held arrows. They built a narrow channel leading to the portal frame. If the creature entered the boat, flowing water would push it into the center. The portal was not active, but the trap would be ready once they found 3 pearls. At dawn, they climbed through the mine shaft to the surface. Rain covered the birch forest. No mobs burned in the weak light. Steve and Mira hunted until they found an Enderman standing beneath an overhang. Steve looked at its face and drew it into a low shelter where it could not reach him. It dropped 1 pearl. The second Enderman appeared near sunset. It stood beside the ruined portal, holding the spruce sign from the village. Not yet. Steve and Mira attacked together. The Enderman did not fight. It kept placing the sign in different spots while they struck it. When it died, it dropped a pearl and Rowan's shield. The shield had been clean when Steve threw it during the seeking game. Now 3 deep lines had been cut across the front. Inside one line, tiny letters had been carved. I can see his room. Rowan is alive, Steve said. Mira shook her head. Something wrote that for us. Either way, it wants us to go back. That is why we should not. Steve looked toward the darkening forest. Somewhere between the birch trunks, a white point moved and vanished. He knew Mira was right. He also knew he would never leave Rowan without one last attempt. They returned to the village instead of the stronghold. The walk took most of the night. The village smoke had stopped, but the air above it remained dark. No lanterns shone. No villagers walked between the houses. The farms had dried into brown dirt, though only 2 days had passed. At the eastern gate, Steve found the iron golem. It stood in the exact place where it had disappeared. Both arms were raised, its body was blackened, and a white mask had been fixed over its face. Mira broke the mask with an arrow. The golem fell into separate iron blocks. Every village door opened. The villagers stepped outside in a slow line. White masks covered their faces. They made no sound. One by one, they pointed toward the church. Steve raised his shield and entered. The stone room was larger inside than it had been before. Rows of wooden benches filled the floor. At the far end stood the playmate. Its arms rested on Rowan's shoulders. Rowan was kneeling in front of it. This time Steve checked the shadow. Rowan's shadow was normal. His face was pale, and his armor was gone, but he was breathing. "Do not come closer," Rowan said. The playmate leaned down until its white mask rested beside his head. "It has a room under the world," Rowan continued. His voice shook. "It keeps everyone who makes noise. They are still alive when the game starts. Between games, they are blocks on a shelf." Mira stepped beside Steve. "How do we get you out?" "You do not." The playmate patted Rowan's head. "It wants the portal," Rowan said. "The last player tried to send it away. It learned where the doors go. It wants you to open another one." Steve tightened his grip on the shield. "Then why show us the journal?" Rowan looked at him. Because it cannot place the eyes itself. The playmate's mask tilted. A thin, dark mouth opened across it. Mira fired. Her arrow struck the mask. It did not pass through. A crack appeared from the left eye to the edge. The playmate jerked back. Rowan fell forward and rolled away. "The game is active," Mira shouted. Steve looked at the sky through the church windows. The moon had stopped moving. Red words filled his sight. Hiding 60 seconds. The playmate had started the next round without warning. Its white mask split into a wide smile. Small human-looking eyes opened above the old dark holes. Bright teeth filled the crack. The calm figure from the plane was gone. What stood behind Rowan now looked hungry. Steve threw a boat onto the church floor. Mira struck the playmate again, driving it back. One long foot touched the boat. The creature snapped into the seat with its arms folded against its sides. Its smile vanished. For a second it looked almost foolish, trapped in a small oak boat inside the church. Then the timer reached 55. The boat began to shake. "Move," Steve shouted. They grabbed Rowan and ran. The masked villagers closed around them, but Rowan rang the church bell. The sound made every villager freeze. Steve broke a window and the three climbed through. Behind them, the church walls bowed outward. The roof lifted. A black pointed head pushed through the stone. The playmate had grown too large for the building, but the boat still clung around its legs. The timer showed 48. They had to hide, not fight. Every second they spent running gave it more sound to follow. Rowan led them to the farm channel. He knew where the playmate had found Mira during the first game. At the far end, behind 3 dirt blocks, was a narrow space left by the water. They entered one at a time. Steve replaced the dirt, leaving them inside a 2-block pocket with water at their feet. "No talking," he whispered. The timer reached 39. Heavy steps crossed the farm above. They were no longer soft. Each one broke tilled dirt and sent dust into the hole. The playmate stopped directly over them. A tapping began on the dirt wall. One finger, then another. The creature tested each block. Rowan covered his mouth. Mira held her bow across her chest. Steve watched the timer. 32. The tapping moved away. From the village came Steve's own voice. "It is safe. Come out." Mira closed her eyes. Then the voice changed to Rowan's. "Steve left you. He went to the portal." The tapping returned, this time under the water. 24. A black finger rose through the water between Steve's boots. It moved slowly, feeling for him. Steve shifted his foot half an inch. His armor brushed the dirt with a faint scrape. The finger stopped. The whole hand pushed up. Mira grabbed Steve's arm before he could pull away. Movement would make more noise. The hand opened beneath him and rested against the bottom of his boot. 18. The playmate made a pleased sound. Rowan suddenly took Steve's shield and struck the dirt wall. The crash was deafening inside the small space. The black hand vanished. "What are you doing?" Steve asked. Rowan broke through the wall and ran into the farm. "It already knows me," he called. "Do not let it learn you." The playmate crossed the distance in one step. Rowan's name rose above the crops, higher and higher, as if he were being pulled into the sky. He did not scream this time. His name blinked once and went out. The timer showed 11. Steve began to dig after him, but Mira held him down. Her grip did not loosen even when he fought her. Above them, long feet moved away through the wheat. 5, 4. The playmate began to count with the timer. 3. Its face appeared under the water. The cracked mask smiled up through the dirt. 2. Mira's bowstring creaked as her hand tightened. 1. The face rushed toward them. Daylight returned, the water cleared. The message said they had won. Rowan was gone again. On the dry farm above, his shield lay beside a new ender pearl. Mira picked it up. He knew we needed one more. Steve stared at the empty sky. He knew it would drop one. Then make it matter. They ran back to the stronghold. The playmate followed at a distance, never hiding now. Sometimes it stood among the birch trees, sometimes it appeared on a hill ahead of them. Its cracked white mask was always turned toward Steve. It was no longer stalking them because it needed surprise. It wanted him to know it was there. In the stronghold, they crafted the final 3 eyes. Steve placed them into the portal frame. The first clicked into place. The second made the room shake. Before he placed the third, Mira stopped him. The journal writer filled all 12, she said. They were removed later. What if the playmate came back through? Then we do not give it time. They prepared the trap. Mira moved the boat dispenser closer to the frame. Steve filled the water channel. They placed a second boat by hand in case the first failed. Rowan's shield rested against the lever. Steve put the final eye into the socket. Black space filled the portal. Pale stars moved deep below its surface. The sound of the end rolled through the room like distant wind. For a few seconds, nothing else happened. Then Rowan climbed out of the portal. He rose from the black surface as if walking upstairs. His clothes were torn, and dark lines crossed his face. He looked back into the end and reached for Steve. "Close it," he said. Steve stepped forward. Mira blocked him. "Check the shadow." There was no shadow. The portal's light passed through Rowan's feet. His face sagged. The skin opened into a white mask. The playmate unfolded from Rowan's shape and filled the room. Its head brushed the ceiling. Its smile was wider than before, and too many small eyes moved across its black face. Mira pulled the lever. Water burst from the wall. A boat shot across the wool floor and struck the playmate's legs. The creature dropped into the seat. The current caught the boat and pushed it toward the portal. The playmate dug its fingers into the stone. Long black marks cut across the floor. The boat slowed at the frame. Steve charged with Rowan's shield. He hit the creature with everything he had. The shield cracked. The boat slid over the edge and vanished into the end. The room became quiet. Steve and Mira stared at the active portal. No hand came back. No voice laughed. The stronghold stopped shaking. Mira let out one weak breath. "We did it." Words appeared above the portal. "Seeking. Find me 3 times." The timer started at 60. They had not sent the playmate away. They had sent it to a place where it could hide. The black cover returned over Steve's sight. A force pulled both players forward. Steve felt the portal take him. Stone vanished under his boots. Cold air struck his face, and then he landed on pale end stone. When his vision cleared, the end was wrong. There was no dragon. No obsidian towers stood on the island. Instead, 3 copies of the village floated over the void. One was whole and bright. One was burned. The last was made from black blocks with white doors. Narrow bridges joined them to the spawn platform. Mira stood beside Steve. Rowan stood on the first bridge. This Rowan had a shadow. "It put pieces of us here," he said. "Every player it takes becomes a hiding place." The timer showed 49. Steve looked at the 3 villages. Where is the playmate? Everywhere. The first pale mark flashed above the timer. Rowan gasped. His body turned into black smoke. For 1 second, the playmate stood where he had been, wearing Rowan's face like a mask. Then it vanished. "That counted as 1, Mira said. They ran to the bright village. The villagers moved normally, unaware of the void beyond their farms. Steve searched the church while Mira checked the houses. At the well, he saw the iron golem standing with its back to him. Its arms were too long. Steve struck it. The golem folded into smoke. The second mark lit. The timer dropped from 31 to 15. The whole bright village began to burn. Mira called from the far bridge, "Steve, here!" He crossed into the black village. Every door stood open. Behind each was a player frozen like an armor stand. Some wore old leather, some had diamond gear, some had skins Steve had never seen. Their names floated dimly over their heads. At the end of the path stood Mira. Another Mira came up behind Steve. Both raised their bows. "Hit her," said the first. "No, hit her," said the second. The timer showed 9. Steve looked for shadows. Neither Mira had one. The black ground swallowed them. Then he remembered the farm pocket. The real Mira had held his arm with her left hand, but she carried her bow in the right. One of the figures held the bow as Mira always did. The other had copied her like a mirror. Steve threw the broken shield at the mirrored one. It opened into the playmate. The third mark lit at 2 seconds. The false villages broke apart. Blocks fell into the void. The frozen players vanished with them. Steve grabbed the real Mira and jumped toward the central island as the bridge disappeared. They landed beside the return fountain. The message appeared once more. "Game over, you win." An end portal opened in the fountain. Through it, Steve could see the stronghold room. Mira smiled for the first time since they had found the village. "Go." Steve stepped onto the portal, but she did not follow. Her feet had turned black. The darkness climbed her legs like rising water. Mira looked down and understood. During the game, the playmate had copied her. It had left part of itself inside the copy that remained. "Steve," she said, very calmly, "if I cross, it crosses. We can stop it together." We could not stop it with 3. The blackness reached her waist. White spots opened across her arms like tiny masks. Steve stepped away from the portal. "I am not leaving you." Mira fired an arrow at the block beside his feet. The force knocked him backward into the fountain. "Then you did not learn the game," she said. The portal took him. Steve fell onto the stronghold floor alone. The end portal went dark behind him. All 12 eyes cracked at once and broke into dust. The redstone lamp above the trap switched off. From the dead portal came Mira's final words. Do not hide where it expects fear. The frame became ordinary stone. Steve waited for the playmate. It did not come. He waited for Mira's name to appear in a death message. It never did. After an hour, he left the portal room, crossed the mineshaft, and climbed into morning light. Before leaving the stronghold, Steve returned to the library and took both journals. He added 3 pages of his own. He wrote Rowan's name, Mira's name, the seed of the world, and the location of the dead portal. He explained that a win did not end the game. He explained the boat trap and warned that the playmate could use a friend as a hiding place. On the final page, he wrote one rule in larger letters. If it gives you a choice, the choice is part of the trap. He placed one copy in a library chest and carried the other. If he failed to reach safety, someone else might find the first. If the playmate found it instead, the warning might change, but Steve could do nothing about that. He was tired of secrets that arrived only after someone vanished. The first day south, he crossed the birch forest and saw 3 armor stands between the trees. One wore Rowan's helmet. One wore Mira's boots. The last wore Steve's blue shirt and purple trousers. All 3 turned their heads as he passed. Steve did not stop. When he looked back from the edge of the forest, the armor stands were following him in a straight line. They froze whenever he faced them and moved whenever he turned away. Steve reached a river before dark. He built a pillar in the center of the water, placed a bed on top, and slept before the moon rose. In his dream, he stood in the black village in the end. Every door had Mira's voice behind it. She kept saying that she had found a way home. Steve woke with one hand on the bed and the other reaching into empty air. The armor stands waited on the riverbank. They could not cross the water. At dawn, Steve broke the bed, took his boat, and left them there. On the second day, a line of spruce signs appeared along his route. The first said "Wrong way." The second said "Your friends are north." The third said "Mira 1-2." Steve broke none of them. Near noon, he found a fourth sign planted in open sand. It held only a drawing of a smiling white face. Fresh footprints led from the sign to the edge of his shadow and stopped. That night, Steve slept inside a shallow cave. He sealed the opening, lit every block, and kept Rowan's shield beside him. Just before sleep took him, a message claimed that monsters were nearby. Steve searched the cave and found nothing. He tried again. The same message appeared. He dug deeper, placed the bed in a new room, and still the world refused to let him rest. Midnight came. Phantoms cried outside. Steve knew what would happen if another full night passed. He opened the journal and searched for an answer, but the pages about sleep were black. Words slowly formed over the ink. Not yet. Steve carried the bed outside. The 3 armor stands had crossed the river and gathered at the cave entrance. The one dressed like Steve lay down when it saw the bed. A sleep message appeared at once. Steve understood. The playmate had marked the false Steve as the owner of every bed he placed. He raised Rowan's shield and charged. The armor stand in his clothes did not fight. It broke with one strike, dropping a player head with Steve's face. The head whispered, "Occupied." Steve threw it into the river. When he tried the bed again, sleep came seconds before dawn. On the third day, he entered a dark oak forest. The roof of leaves made it feel like night. Mushrooms covered the ground, and hostile mobs waited in the shade. Steve moved fast, but the forest seemed to repeat. He passed the same bent tree 4 times. Each time another white mask had been fixed to its trunk. At last he reached a clearing. Rowan and Mira stood in the center, alive and unhurt. Rowan held an eye of ender. Mira carried her map. They smiled as if the village had never happened. "We found a way out," Mira said. Steve wanted to believe her. He wanted it so badly that he took one step into the clearing. Then Rowan said, "Come hide with us." Steve stopped. The real Rowan would have told him to run. The real Mira would never offer a hiding place without checking its exits. He backed away. Their smiles widened. White masks pushed through their faces, and the clearing filled with soft laughter. Steve turned and followed the setting sun until the forest ended. He walked south for 6 days in all. He slept every night. Sometimes monsters stood near the bed, and sometimes he heard counting beyond the trees, but sleep always came before the third night. The playmate did not appear in its true body. On the 7th day, Steve reached an ocean village built on a warm beach. Cats moved between sandstone houses. Children chased each other along the docks. An iron golem watched the gate. Everything looked normal. Steve traded for bread, repaired his armor, and rented a small room above the water. He placed a bed beside the window. Before sunset, he checked under the floor, behind the door, and on the roof. There were no signs and no white masks. That night, he slept. In the morning, a child from the village knocked on his door. She held Rowan's shield. It was whole again, without a crack or mark. "A tall friend asked me to give you this," she said. Steve took the shield. Where did he go? The child pointed toward the sea. Far beyond the dock, a single oak boat floated on the bright water. A black figure sat inside it. Its long knees rose above the sides. The white mask faced the village. Steve did not wait for night. He filled his pack, took another boat, and left the shore. He paddled east until the village became a pale line behind him. The other boat never moved, yet it remained the same distance away. At sunset, the square sun touched the water. Words appeared across Steve's sight. Hiding. Find a good place to hide. There was no land for hundreds of blocks. There was no dark corner, no wall, and no floor to crawl beneath. Only open water and an empty seat in the boat behind him. The timer began at 60. Steve stopped paddling. Mira had told him not to hide where the playmate expected fear. So Steve turned the boat around and rowed straight toward the black figure. The playmate tilted its cracked mask. For the first time, it stepped out of its boat and stood on the ocean as if the water were solid ground. Steve did not run. He did not reach for his sword. He kept rowing. At 10 seconds, the playmate bent down until its white face was level with his. At 5, Steve raised Rowan's shield and showed the creature its own reflection in the polished iron. The playmate stared at the smiling face in the shield. At 1 second, it reached for the reflection instead of Steve. The timer vanished. Morning light broke across the ocean. The black figure was gone. Rowan's shield had turned completely white, but Steve was still alive, alone in his boat, moving east, while a soft voice beneath the water began counting toward the next game.